Hey everyone, and welcome back for another deep dive with us. Today we're going to be talking about something you might not know a lot about.
Okay.
It's International Men's Day.
Oh, yeah, I've heard of that.
Yeah, have you?
Yeah,
It's not as well known as International Women's Day.
that's right. Yeah.
So we're going to dig into kind of the history of it, the purpose of it, and why it matters in our quest for a more balanced world for everyone.
I think a lot of people would be surprised by, the origins of it
Yeah, for sure.
and, what it's really about.
Yeah, and why it even exists in the first place.
Right.
So to start off, let's rewind the clock all the way back to 1999.
Wow. Okay.
Back then, a history professor in Trinidad and Tobago, Dr. Jerome Teelucksingh, founded International Men's Day,
Mm.
and he chose November 19th specifically because it was his own father's birthday,
Oh, wow.
but also a day that had already been celebrated in his country as a day for unity through sports.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah, so I think it's interesting how that kind of personal touch really sets the tone for what International Men's Day is all about, you know?
Yeah.
Celebrating the men in our lives, their contributions and their well-being, all while working towards a more inclusive society.
Exactly.
So it's not about putting genders against each other, but about creating a better world for all.
Right. And I think that's sometimes a misconception about International Men's Day.
All right.
People think that it's trying to take away from women or,
Yeah.
be in competition with International Women's Day, but it's really not.
It's not at all.
It's about recognizing the unique challenges that men face
Yeah.
and also celebrating their contributions to society.
Totally. And this idea of a better world is reflected in the 6 core objectives that
Right.
Dr. Teelucksingh actually outlined when he founded this. They focus on promoting positive male role models, celebrating men's contributions to society, improving men's health and well-being, addressing discrimination against men, creating safer environments for boys, and ultimately fostering better gender relations.
It's a pretty comprehensive list,
Yeah.
and it really gets to the heart of what we're talking about here.
Yeah, for sure. So those objectives are broad, and we'll kind of dig into those. But let's get into some specifics, especially around men's health and well-being.
Okay.
Because one statistic that I came across when I was doing research for this that really stopped me in my tracks was that men account for about 75% of suicides globally.
Yeah. That's a staggering statistic.
It's huge.
It's really alarming, and it speaks to the importance of addressing men's mental health.
Yeah.
There's this idea that men need to be strong and silent,
Right.
that they should just man up and deal with their problems on their own.
Yeah, you're told to suck it up, be a man.
Exactly, and that kind of thinking can be incredibly damaging.
Yeah. So International Men's Day provides this opportunity to challenge those harmful norms
Right.
and encourage men to open up about their mental health.
Yeah, it's about creating a space where vulnerability is seen as a strength.
Yes,
And where seeking help is encouraged.
totally. And so this is obviously a huge issue, so we're going to spend some more time on this. But first, I want to get your take on this statistic.
Okay.
What are your initial thoughts when you hear something like 3 out of 4 suicides globally are men?
Well, it's heartbreaking, honestly.
Yeah.
And I think it highlights how much work we still need to do
Right.
to break down those harmful stereotypes
Exactly.
that prevent men from seeking help.
And it's not just an individual issue, it's a societal issue.
Absolutely.
We need to look at the systemic factors that are contributing to this mental health crisis among men.
Right, like the pressures that men face in the workplace.
Yeah,
The expectations around being the provider,
right.
breadwinner.
Being tough and not showing weakness.
Exactly. All of that contributes to this problem.
Yeah, that's a great point, and it kind of leads into our next point that I wanted to talk about, which is the workplace.
Okay.
When I was reading through the materials you sent me, the research on men and workplace pressures was really eye-opening.
Yeah, it's a big issue.
What are some of the things that stood out to you?
Well, one thing that really struck me was the link between workplace stress and men's mental health.
Yeah.
It's like this vicious cycle.
Yeah.
Men are often in high-pressure jobs.
Right.
They're expected to work long hours,
Yeah, definitely.
and they're discouraged from taking time off or showing any signs of weakness.
And all that can lead to burnout, stress, and a lack of work-life balance.
Exactly, and that can have a really negative impact on their mental health.
And it's interesting how this ties back into those traditional masculinity norms that we were talking about earlier. It's like these norms are creating a situation where men feel trapped and unable to express their struggles.
Yeah, and they're less likely to seek help when they need it.
Exactly. So it's almost like they're set up to fail in a way.
In a way, yeah, it's a really tough situation.
So we've talked about these workplace pressures and how they affect men's mental health,
Right.
but it's not just about mental health.
No, it's not.
I was also reading about how men are less likely to seek medical attention when they're physically ill, too.
That's right. There's
Yeah.
this tendency to downplay
Yeah.
symptoms and try to tough it out,
Yeah.
which can lead to delays in diagnosis and treatment.
Right. So it's not just a mental thing, it's like a whole cultural thing
It really is.
where men are taught not to show any weakness.
Exactly. And that can be really dangerous.
And so International Men's Day is about raising awareness of these issues
Yes.
and encouraging men to take care of themselves, both physically and mentally.
Right. It's about breaking down those harmful stereotypes and creating a more supportive environment for men.
Totally. So this is all pretty heavy stuff, you know? It paints this picture of men facing these really difficult challenges.
It does, but it's important to remember that this isn't about creating a narrative of victimhood. It's about acknowledging the very real struggles that men face
Right.
while also recognizing their incredible strength and resilience.
Yeah.
It's about creating a more balanced and nuanced understanding of men's experiences.
Yeah, for sure. So it's not black and white.
Right.
There's a lot of gray area.
Exactly.
So as we continue this conversation, it's important to remember that.
Absolutely.
And speaking of continuing this conversation, we've talked a lot about men's mental health and workplace pressures.
Uh-huh.
But there are also significant challenges that men face within the legal and educational systems.
Yeah, those are important issues too.
Yeah, so let's take a look at those next.
Okay, sounds good. Yeah, so we were talking about how men face all these different challenges and, beyond mental health and the workplace, there are some other big ones too.
Right, like in the legal system.
Yeah, exactly. And in schools.
Yeah, I was reading about how there can be biases against men in family courts sometimes, especially during custody battles.
Yeah, that's a really tough one, because obviously the most important thing is the well-being of the child.
Right, of course.
But sometimes those decisions can be based on outdated ideas about what a father's role should be.
Yeah, it's like those old stereotypes we were talking about are still hanging around even in the courts.
It's true. And it can lead to some really unfair outcomes for men.
So what can we do about that? I mean, how do we make sure the courts are being fair to both parents?
Well, for one thing, we need to raise awareness about this issue.
Okay.
And make sure that judges and lawyers are educated about the potential for bias.
So they can make decisions that are based on facts and not on stereotypes.
Exactly.
It's about recognizing that fathers can be just as loving and capable as mothers.
Right, and that they deserve to be treated equally under the law.
Totally. And it's not just family courts either.
No.
I was also reading about how boys are actually falling behind girls in school in some places.
Oh, yeah. That's a big concern.
Yeah, like boys are dropping out of school more often.
Okay.
Their test scores aren't as good.
Right. And they're less likely to go to college.
It's a complex issue
For sure.
with lots of different factors at play.
So what are some of those factors? I mean, why are boys struggling so much in school?
Well, one thing that researchers have found is that boys and girls can have different learning styles.
Oh, interesting. So, how they learn best is different.
Exactly. And
It's
sometimes the way that schools are set up can favor girls' learning styles.
I never thought about that.
And then there are also societal expectations,
Right.
like the idea that boys should be good at sports or math and science.
Well, girls are supposed to be good at reading and writing.
Exactly. And those kinds of stereotypes can really limit boys' options and make them feel like they don't belong in certain subjects.
So it's kind of like a self-fulfilling prophecy.
In a way, yeah.
And then there's also the issue of role models.
Right.
If boys don't see a lot of men in education, then they might not think of it as a career path for them.
That's a really important point. Yeah, and it all ties back to this idea of positive male role models.
Yes.
Which is one of the core objectives of International Men's Day, right?
Sure.
It's about showing boys that they can be anything they want to be.
Absolutely. And that there are men out there who are succeeding in all different fields.
Including education.
Of course.
So we've talked about these big challenges that men are facing
Right.
in the legal system and in education. And it can all feel pretty overwhelming. Like, how do we even begin to address all of this?
It's a big question.
It is, but I think it's important to remember that we can all make a difference.
Even in small ways.
So what are some things that our listeners can do to get involved and start making a difference?
Well, I think one of the most important things is to start talking about these issues.
Okay.
With our friends, our families, our colleagues.
So just having conversations.
Exactly, because the more we talk about these things, the more awareness we raise.
And the more we can start to challenge those harmful
Yeah,
stereotypes. And I think it's also important to support organizations that are working to help men and boys.
absolutely. There are some great organizations out there doing really important work.
Yeah, like what kind of organizations?
Well, there are organizations that focus on men's mental health,
Okay.
like Movember.
Oh, yeah, heard of them.
They do a great job of raising awareness about prostate cancer and other men's health issues.
And they've raised a ton of money for research.
Exactly.
What about organizations that are working to promote positive masculinity?
There are a lot of those too.
Like, what are some examples?
Well, there's the Mankind Project,
Okay.
which offers workshops and retreats for men
Uh-huh.
focused on personal growth and emotional intelligence.
Oh, that sounds interesting.
And there are also a lot of local groups and initiatives.
Oh, cool.
So do some research and see what's available in your area.
Awesome. So there are all these different ways to get involved?
Yes, and even just sharing information about International Men's Day can make a difference.
Right. So like posting on social media. Sick.
Exactly. Or talking to your friends about it.
It's about raising awareness and starting those conversations.
Exactly.
I love it. So we've talked about a lot of heavy stuff today,
We have.
but I think it's important to end on a positive note.
I agree.
So what gives you hope when you think about the future of men and boys?
You know what gives me hope is seeing all the amazing people who are working to make a difference.
Yeah.
The activists, the educators, the researchers, the everyday people who are speaking up and challenging the status quo.
That's what it's all about, right?
Yeah, and it's inspiring to see how much progress we've made
Totally.
and how much momentum there is for change.
So what's one thing that our listeners can take away from this conversation?
I think the most important takeaway is that we can all be part of the solution.
Yeah.
We can all challenge harmful stereotypes,
Mm.
support the men and boys in our lives,
Mm-hmm.
and work to create a more just and equitable world for everyone.
And that's a great place to leave it for today.
Yeah, I think so.
But we'll be back soon with the third and final part of this deep dive on International Men's Day, so stay tuned.
Can't wait.
Okay, so we've been talking about how important it is to, move beyond just being aware of these issues that men are facing and actually do something.
Yeah, take action.
Yeah, but how do we do that?
Well-
Where do we even start with all this stuff?
Well, I think a lot of people get overwhelmed because they think they need to make some big grand gesture.
Right, like quit your job and become an activist.
Exactly. But it
And-
doesn't have to be that complicated.
So what can people do, like, in their everyday lives?
It can be as simple as like speaking up when you hear someone making a sexist joke,
Okay.
or, calling out discrimination when you see it,
Right.
or just listening to the men in your life without judgment.
Okay, so it's like those little things, those little everyday interactions.
Exactly. Those things can make a difference.
Yeah, I guess it's like changing the culture one conversation at a time.
Right. And when enough people start doing that, it can create momentum for bigger change.
Yeah, that makes sense. So, like, it starts with us as individuals,
Absolutely.
and then it can kind of ripple outwards.
Exactly.
That's cool. And you mentioned supporting organizations
Yes.
that are doing work in this area.
Yes, there's some amazing organizations out there.
What are some that come to mind?
There's Movember.
Oh, yeah, I know about them. They do the whole mustache thing in November, right?
Exactly. They've done a really great job of raising awareness about men's health issues.
Yeah, and I think they've raised a ton of money for research, too.
They have, and then there are organizations like the Mankind Project.
What do they do?
They offer programs for men to help them develop emotional intelligence and build healthier relationships.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah, and there are a lot of other great organizations out there too.
People should just kind of do their research and see what's available in their area.
Exactly.
Cool. And even just sharing information about International Men's Day can be helpful, right?
Absolutely. The more people who know about it, the better.
So, like, tell your friends, post about it on social media.
All right, just spread the word.
Awesome. So we've covered a lot of ground in this deep dive. We
Yep.
have. It's been a lot to process.
It has.
But I think it's been really valuable to have these conversations.
Me too.
So to wrap things up, what's one thing that you want our listeners to take away from all of this?
I think the most important takeaway is that we all have a role to play in creating a better world for men and boys.
Okay.
It's not just up to men to solve these problems.
Right. We all need to be involved.
Exactly. So, whether you're a man or a woman or non-binary, we can all challenge harmful stereotypes, support the men and boys in our lives, and advocate for policies that promote gender equality.
That's a great message. I love that. So thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive into International Men's Day.
It's been a pleasure.
And to our listeners, we hope this has given you some food for thought and maybe even inspired you to take action.
Yes, get involved.
And if you want to learn more about International Men's Day, there are a ton of resources available online. So do your research, get involved, and let's work together to create a world where everyone can thrive.
Sounds good.
Thanks again for listening, and we'll catch you in our next deep dive.